This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your top stories. Calls for a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine crisis continue from all sides, but on the ground, more NATO troops take their positions in Europe and Russia and Belarus prepare for military drills. NATO member Hungary has told Euronews there will be no extra NATO troops on its soil, urging calm over the Ukraine crisis.
A Belarusian cross-country skier has fled to Poland with her family amid the crackdown on the country's opposition.
And at the Winter Olympics, a figure skating gold medal is on hold amid reports of a positive drug test. I'm Helena Humphrey, glad you could join me. Tensions between Kiev and Moscow remain high as diplomatic efforts to achieve peace in eastern Ukraine and deal with Russia's security concerns have failed to make a breakthrough. In Donetsk and Luhansk, the situation is tense as thousands of Russian troops remain close to the border. Ukraine's foreign minister says that the Kremlin wants to take revenge for the Soviet Union losing the Cold War. Well, with diplomatic solutions on hold, both NATO and Russia are flexing their military might. The US has redeployed 1,000 troops from Germany to Romania. The Pentagon says the move is part of strategic efforts to reinforce NATO's eastern flank. Meanwhile, British forces have joined NATO allies for military exercises in Estonia. Russia has sent 400 missile systems to Belarus ahead of joint military drills scheduled for Thursday. Russia's defense ministry says its paratroopers took part in exercises in the country on Wednesday. The Kremlin also released footage of fighter jets patrolling the border of Belarus and Ukraine. And our Russia analyst Galina Polanskaya is with me now. Galina, good evening to you. Good to see you. All parties agree that diplomacy is the way forward. And then at the same time, we've got troops moving into positions on both sides. So do actions speak louder than words here?
Good evening. Well, I would say that both paths of actions and words are open, and probably we are at the crossroad right now. Russia starts joint military exercises in Belarus, sends warships to the Black Sea. At the same time, the Kremlin says that it is expecting a phone call from the French President Emmanuel Macron, who, as the Russian state media say, promised Vladimir Putin to report about the outcome of his meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev. And today, Vladimir Putin's spokesman said that there were some positive signals that the Kremlin heard at the joint press conference between Presidents Zelensky and Macron, that the solution of the Ukraine crisis is fulfillment of the Minsk agreements. At the same time, Mr. Peskov said that the Kremlin did not hear that Ukraine was ready to make steps, concrete steps right now, and that it was a negative signal. Russia accuses Ukraine of undermining those agreements and says that the US is helping it, and what Russia wants is the special status of Donbass, of the separatist region, of those republics, and a direct dialogue with the representatives of those self-proclaimed republics. And we know what Ukraine wants. It wants the control over the border of its country, which is also one of the points of the Minsk agreements. So I think that the crucial point maybe is this Thursday, when the political advisors of the Normandy format will meet in Berlin, because their goal is to come to one single understanding of those Minsk agreements.
And Galina, before that, we've got the UK Foreign Minister Liz Truss heading over to Moscow to meet with her Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. He is a master of controlling the message in the Russian media, isn't he?
Well, he is the master of controlling the message. He is indeed, and the talks are not going to be easy. And there is a press conference, and it's very interesting to hear what they will have to say. We know that Liz Truss said that she is in Moscow to make it clear that Russia must immediately withdraw its forces and respect Ukraine's sovereignty or face severe consequences. There is this biggest, toughest sanctions plan against Russia in the UK, which is, by the way, under question, apparently, according to some media in the UK. But of course, those sanctions are going to be discussed, and we know that the message of Russia is clear. It keeps on saying that it does not want to attack Ukraine, and the spokeswoman of the Foreign Ministry of Russia today voiced something that probably Mr. Lavrov will tell tomorrow during the talks. So she said that the Western countries can de-escalate the situation if they stop delivering weapons to Ukraine, recall Western military advisors and instructors from its territory, and stop joint exercises of the armed forces of Ukraine and NATO.
All right, Galina Polinskaya for us. Thank you so much. Well, earlier I spoke with Hungary's Foreign Affairs Minister Peter Szijjártó about how his country is dealing with the ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis, and he says that Budapest won't accept NATO troops on its soil and that sanctions won't deter Russia.
Sanctions have been in place against the Russian Federation,
Further
right?
sanctions?
Yeah, sorry.
Would you support further
I think that, first, sanctions can or should be made only in case something happens. Okay, this is number one. Number two, when it comes to sanctions, it's obvious that these sanctions do not work out.
But you supported them previously.
Because we were part of the. We didn't want to break the European unity. We never vetoed. We always aligned with this decision. We never vetoed the decision. But look, I mean, if you look at the sanctions themselves, it's a failure. They don't work out. They are unsuccessful because if you look at the trade volume between big Western European countries, including France, by the way, with the Russian Federation, you will see the figures. And you will see how much the trade between France and the Russian Federation, the trade between Germany and the Russian Federation has increased since the sanctions have been in place. So my position is that if we speak about further sanctions, it's absolutely necessary to see an honest analysis of the impacts of the sanctions which have been in place.
Well, let's talk about other measures then, because there are measures that can be taken, and Hungary, as a NATO member, for example, could accept to take more NATO troops on its soil. This is something that other countries have agreed to, Romania, Bulgaria. Will Hungary also agree to host more NATO troops?
No, we have not agreed to that, and we will not agree because we have already NATO troops on the territory of the country, which is the Hungarian army. And the Hungarian armed forces are in a proper shape to guarantee the security of the country. So we don't need additional troops on the territory of Hungary. We have ongoing cooperation within NATO with the fellow member states on training or rotation.
That's a very strong line, though, bearing in mind that you are a NATO member and that you're also a member of the EU. And what I'm trying to understand is, in this current crisis, are you actually closer then to this membership and the EU and NATO or Russia?
Well, we are members of NATO and we are members of the European Union. But once again, I want to underline that the Hungarian armed forces are in a proper shape to guarantee the security of our country. So if they were not in that shape, then this question whether to accept further troops would make sense. But in this case, it doesn't make sense because we can protect ourselves.
Well, let's bring in Ofer Friedman, lecturer in war studies and author of the book Russian Hybrid Warfare. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. We can quite clearly see that shuttle diplomacy, as it's being referred to, between Kremlin and the Kiev has ramped up of late. We've seen Macron, Scholz, Liz Truss, for example, tomorrow. But has any real progress actually been made in this?
Well, the Kremlin created this military buildup to ignite, shape, shift, and generally facilitate the diplomatic discussions intended to address Moscow's security concerns, which, by the way, have been largely ignored by the West for decades. Assuming that Moscow has no appetite for full-scale invasion and occupation of Ukraine, and assuming that Moscow will not simply send troops back empty-handed, it has four main options. First is limited kinetic operation against the Ukrainian military assets and infrastructure. Second option is a limited kinetic operation against NATO assets in Ukraine, however small they are. Third option is a combination of these two. And fourth option, which generally ignored, is maintaining the current military buildup without further kinetic actions, as the Kremlin promises so far. I believe the current situation on the Ukrainian border was created to initiate diplomatic dialogue and not kinetic operation. However, if the Kremlin will estimate that a limited military operation will accelerate this dialogue in the right direction, then a limited kinetic operation is still an option.
But the thing is, it's so hard to know, really, isn't it? Because it keeps seeming to be that there'll be talks between various leaders, after which President Putin has said on various occasions that he's open to more dialogue. Then the next day we wake up to headlines in which the Kremlin is seeming to downplay those hopes. So which is it? Is this a strategy?
Well, no, this is diplomacy, and by its very nature, it's full of smokes and mirrors. The Kremlin plays its own game, as well as President Macron, as we saw in the last few days, or President Biden. Russia have repeatedly said that the kinetic operation is not their intention. Okay, so they said. Washington similarly changes its estimation of the Russian intention on a daily basis. One day they say that Russians will invade tomorrow. On the other day they say they might invade in the following month. One day they say that Russian military has 70% capacity. On the other day, that it prepares propaganda movies to fake Ukrainian provocation. It's all smokes and mirrors on all sides as an inherent part of diplomatic processes. I would say that de-escalation in Ukraine is possible, but that Moscow will simply send troops back home empty-handed without any diplomatic achievement, it will be naive.
You said that it's all smoke and mirror on all sides then, so let me just ask you briefly, if I may, what is the intention of some of the Western leaders in the involvement in this crisis?
Well, assuming that every Western leader, first and foremost, pursues national interest of the country that this leader represents, this is, I think, answers the question.
All right, Ofer Friedman, lecturer in war studies and author of the book Russian Hybrid Warfare. We thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come, a photo of the British Prime Minister next to an open bottle of alcohol at a lockdown gathering has emerged. We'll have all the latest after the break. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is back under pressure following the release of a picture that appears to show him at a party in Downing Street in December 2020. The news that a new image had been leaked to the media was delivered during Prime Minister's questions. Some MPs renewed their calls for Johnson to resign, but for leader of the opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, it was back to pressuring the Prime Minister over the cost of living crisis currently gripping the UK. Let's take this straight then to Tig Enright, who's standing by in London tonight. Tig, I think it's fair to say that the Prime Minister was probably hoping that it was going to be back to business at PMQs today, but after that bombshell moment, it wasn't really the case, was it?
That's right, Helena. It was feeling more like a business-as-usual Prime Minister's questions after a few more stormier weeks than usual. Boris Johnson trying his best to move the political agenda on from the party scandal, talking about some ambitious new policies, even the relaxation of COVID measures. Even the opposition's questions were certainly more focused on wider, a variety of more general, shall we say, issues of the day. I think, though, many in the House simply weren't aware of this photo because it was only published while Prime Minister's questions was underway. So when we heard about it late in the session, when a backbench MP raised it, you can imagine the furious Googling which went underway among individuals, myself included, to see what we were talking about. The Prime Minister, though, appears not to have been taken by surprise by it. It's hard to imagine that the newspaper which published it, the Daily Mirror, wouldn't have asked his office about it ahead of time. He was able to speak with authority that it was something that the police already knew about. As bombshells go, it could be argued it wasn't that enormous because it was a party that we did already know about. We were told at the beginning, though, that police had decided it wasn't among those which met the bar for a criminal investigation, although we have now been told that's changed and the police are reviewing that decision. But it's also a reminder that there are hundreds of photos, we're told, of all these different parties in the hands of investigators, both the civil service and the police. And in the fullness of time, it is quite probable that we'll get to see more of them. And in the words of Boris Johnson's former advisor turned adversary, Dominic Cummings, some of the other photos are potentially far more damaging. Helena?
Tig, we also then heard today that the Prime Minister's announced that all of the COVID isolation measures will be lifted 1 month early.
Yeah, that was his big announcement at the beginning of the session. And of course, if you want to move the news agenda on, well, then suggesting that pandemic restrictions are coming to an end entirely, that's how you do it. Now, it has to be said, this is a bringing forward of the date. We'd already been told they would end at the end of March. Now, we're being told it could be at the end of February. Now, Boris Johnson's government has prided itself on being less cautious than other governments when it comes to COVID restrictions. It's not a firm announcement yet. It's an announcement of an intention. They're going to review the data later this month, and assuming things are still moving in the right direction, then COVID restrictions, including the legal requirement to isolate if you have the disease, will be lifted by the end of the month. And what we're talking about is the changing of the law, but not the guidance. It will mean that if you have COVID, it will no longer be a legal requirement to self-isolate, but the government would quite like you to do so. And I think it will certainly please the right wing of the Conservative Party, who typically hate COVID rules, and Boris Johnson is certainly trying to bring them back on side to quell questions about his leadership. And I think with that in mind, it's certainly invited some fairly predictable cynicism that perhaps it's politics behind this decision rather than public health. Helena?
All right, Tig Enright, thank you so much. A Belarusian skier has fled to Poland with her family. After being banned from competing in the Winter Olympics, she joins a growing list of athletes who fled the country amid a crackdown on the opposition. And Matthew in the Cube has the story now.
Daria Dolidovic is certainly not the first Belarusian athlete to flee to neighbouring Poland. The 17-year-old cross-country skier, pictured here on the right with her family, was regarded as a rising sports star in the country. But in January, she was banned from participating in any international competitions, including the ongoing Beijing Winter Olympics. No official reason was given, but it is likely down to the politics of her coach and father, Sergei Dolidovic, a man who himself competed for Belarus at 7 Olympics. Sergei says that his daughter is being punished because of his strong support for Belarus's opposition. And in a post on Facebook, he confirmed that the family had now fled to Poland, but he did express the belief that they would soon return. They are certainly not an isolated case. Several Belarusian athletes have been fined, banned, exiled, or even imprisoned since the disputed re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko in August 2020. Daria Dolidovic's plight is very similar to that of the sprinter Krystyna Timanovskaya, who during the Tokyo Olympics last year appealed for international help when she said she was being forced to return to Belarus by her federation. Timanovskaya was eventually granted a humanitarian visa, and it's unlikely to see that the same will be granted to Daria Dolidovic and her family in Poland, where she says, Helena, that she will now continue training as well as also complete her education.
Matthew, thank you so much. Beijing Olympic officials have delayed the team figure skating medal ceremony due to a legal issue potentially linked to Russian doping. Originally scheduled for Tuesday, the ceremony was set to award the gold medal to the Russian Olympic Committee, but reports say a drug test conducted on a Russian skater before the Games began is the real reason behind the delay. The IOC hasn't provided any details, saying they're in legal consultation with the International Skating Union. Russia is currently serving a 4-year ban from major sporting competitions after being found guilty of state-sponsored doping in 2019. Well, despite this, Day 4 of the Winter Olympic Games saw some great sporting action. US athlete Lindsay Jacobellis showed incredible perseverance to finally get her hands on Olympic gold in the snowboard cross, the first one for Team USA this year. Now, having fallen short at 5 previous Olympic Games, the 36-year-old snowboarder fought off stiff competition from her French counterpart to become the oldest medalist in the sport. But it was heartache for Team USA skier Michaela Schifrin as she crashed out of her slalom event for the second time this week. Schifrin lost control after a matter of seconds and could only watch on in despair as her competitors raced by. The 2-time gold medalist gave an emotional interview in which she admitted to second-guessing her last 15 years and everything she knows about skiing. Well, still to come, we will meet 30 polar bears who are making an abandoned weather station their new home. You're going to want to stick around for that. Hello again, you're watching Euronews Tonight. A dilapidated weather station in the Russian Arctic is enjoying a new lease of life. A group of polar bears have moved in and decided to make it their new home. Rebecca Daunt explains more.
An abandoned Soviet weather station on a remote Russian island has become a safe haven to a celebration of polar bears. These images were captured by wildlife photographer Dmitry Koh, who stumbled across the predators in September last year after travelling some 2,000 kilometres along the country's Arctic coast.
It was very dangerous to land on this island because there were around 30 polar bears at the moment. I decided to use a drone with low noise propellers, so I shouldn't disturb animals.
Scientists say climate change might have forced the bears to make the dilapidated site, which seldom receives any human visitors, an unlikely new home. Wild sea ice, which these giant marine mammals depend on for hunting, could vanish from the Arctic by the end of the century. Rebecca Daunt, Euronews.
Incredible images and an important message. Well, we leave you now with a no comment from Lima, where artists have completed a mural project which aims to bring a fresh image to the San Cristobal Hill neighbourhood. Thanks for watching Euronews Tonight.
El reto del artista es un artista argentino. No radica solamente en su cultura, en general. ¿Puede mirar para acá? ¿Cuál será el